Is The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom a good game to learn Japanese with? That's exactly what we're going to be finding out today in this video. Just a quick warning, we are going to be going through the first couple of hours of gameplay, so if you don't want anything spoiled, then maybe put off this video for a little bit later. However, we're going to be going through it from the perspective of a language learner, not necessarily looking at the story, so I won't be spoiling anything like that, but just looking at what is this game like to learn Japanese with? Is it a good game? Is it a bad game? What are some good things about it? Perhaps maybe what are some bad things about it? How can it be useful for you in your Japanese study? I'm trying to help you choose if this is a game you want to try playing in Japanese yourself. First thing, here are the game options that you can access both on the main menu as well as in the actual game. If you scroll down to the very bottom, there are these three options. One is that you can actually turn on or off furigana, which is really interesting. So normally a game just has furigana and you just have to deal with it whether you like it or if you don't like it. I think it's an absolutely amazing tool, and honestly any game that has furigana for me is probably already going to be a really top tier game for learning Japanese with. However, some students don't want to have furigana. They'd like to actually turn it off because they feel like they rely too much on it. So that's a nice option that here we can see ruby. This is one way you might often see furigana being referred to as just ruby. So you can turn it on or off. And then the next setting, you can actually change the transparency of the background windows, which is really useful if you're going to be using something like capture to text or perhaps Google Lens to do OCR reading. That means taking the image and turning it into text. You can actually extract the text from an image. Well, putting this on the darker setting will actually help you do that, and we'll see a little bit later, it's actually pretty accurate. And then the final setting here is that you can actually change the voice. So you can actually choose what language you want the voice to actually be set in. And I have heard from other people in the Game Gengo community that apparently you can actually freely switch this game in English and Japanese. So even if you buy this game on the Japanese store or the English store, whatever store you buy it on, you'll be able to switch the language. So that's something that's really good about this game. And I believe that's also true with Breath of the Wild. So you don't have to do any of that worry about, oh my god, does this version actually have Japanese text or not? Yes, it does, no matter where you buy it. So the game starts off with these kind of cutscenes, and as you can see, lovely furigana and relatively readable text. There is a downside, you cannot actually pause these cutscenes, so there's no way of actually going through this language at your own pace, which is a big downside for a learner of Japanese. Honestly, it just kind of happens and then it's gone. And that's unfortunate, but that is just how it is. There's no pause button during cutscenes. You could technically take a screenshot on your Switch every time there's a cutscene. Every time there's a new line, just press the screenshot button and then you could go back through it later. That is one kind of cheat way of getting around it, but unfortunately you're going to have to do something like that if you want to break down this text yourself as you're playing. One really cool thing I've noticed is when you actually talk to NPCs, they'll often have multiple lines of dialogue. For example, here in the cave, I actually talked to Zelda 6 times, and each time she had a different piece of dialogue. And you may also notice in the bottom right corner, there's actually a log. Now, unfortunately, it's not as amazing as I was hoping. It's nothing like Triangle Strategy, which has an entire log for the whole game with voice acting that you can replay. It's unfortunately not that amazing, but it is a little bit useful for learners of Japanese. So how this log functions is the current conversation. As that current piece of dialogue is happening, like the current conversation, that current conversation, at any time as it's happening, you can press the log button and you can go back through and read. So perhaps maybe you're having a pretty big interaction between a bunch of characters later on, you can actually go through that. So it's okay, it's all right. It's not amazing. It's better than nothing for sure. It would have been nice to have, like, you know, the entire log of everything that's happening and you can replay the audio and the cutscenes. That would have made it amazing. Unfortunately, that's not the case in this game, but it is still better than Breath of the Wild. As of right now, I've only played kind of like 5 or so hours of the game. There's no way of replaying the cutscenes. So if you want to play this in Japanese and you want to learn from it, I would really recommend taking screenshots of every cutscene. That way you can actually revisit it. Or something I actually personally like to do is just record myself playing with like a capture card. That's also a really useful way as well. And so after that little dungeon bit in the beginning, you're finally kind of able to explore the world a little bit more, and you're kind of in this tutorial area. And this is really where it kind of teaches you how to play, and you get a bunch of various abilities. And this zone is a little bit restrictive, and there's not too many people to interact with. It's not bad, and the zone only lasts like a couple of hours or so. There's one of these main guide characters that are kind of showing you where you need to go, what you want to do, that you're going to be talking with both cutscenes and non-cutscenes. And there's also these cute little robots scattered around the region, which is really nice to kind of interact with. And that's something you'll see a lot in this game. The world is a lot more lived in than the previous Breath of the Wild. This game has NPCs all over the place, so it really kind of allows you to, as you're kind of just enjoying playing this game, because look, Gameplay-wise, this game is, I understand why everyone's giving it 10 out of 10. It's an incredible experience playing. It's so fun. If you're looking to just, completely lose track of time and get completely immersed into a game and just have fun and lots of fun. This game is the pinnacle of fun. What you can do creatively is insane. I'm not going to go too much into that, but gameplay wise, 10 out of 10 for sure. But we're focusing here on language. And for this game, there is a much more balance of gameplay than dialogue. Dialogue is much less. It is better than Breath of the Wild for sure, but it is still very heavy on gameplay. Now, one other way you can come across language is these item descriptions. Now, whenever you come across an item, the first time you'll see it, it'll pop up on the screen with a nice little written description. So this is a nice opportunity, kind of like a Pokedex, a nice opportunity for you to kind of go, okay, I found something new, let's try and read this sentence. That's not bad. Unfortunately, though, for some reason, they didn't choose to add furigana to the item descriptions. And that is a bit unfortunate. So it's not like Yokai Watch where you actually have the furigana on the item descriptions. But I did actually test out with Google Lens. If you don't know what that is, you should definitely get it on your mobile phone, whatever device you have. All you need to do is have Google Lens, the Lens app, open up the app. I think it's like 3 presses. Open up the app, take a photo, press extract text. Done. It's incredible. And I did this several times throughout playing this game for like a couple of hours, and every single time Google Lens got 100% accuracy. One thing I've noticed though is that you want to make sure the backdrop is dark. So here, for example, when you first come across an item, it's actually a little bit lighter than when you go in the game menu. So if you are wanting to extract the text, and if it doesn't work in this way, although I think it will, but if it doesn't, you can just go into the item menu and do it that way as well, and you'll probably get 100% accuracy. So that is one way of kind of cheating the system, where you can actually get access to the language, even though it doesn't have furigana. So that does make it a little bit, easier, but it's not really game specific. That's just something that you can do to help you. And so for the first couple of hours or so, that's pretty much it. You're on this tutorial land, it's a lot of gameplay and not too much dialogue. However, when you finally get to the main world, because this is actually just a tutorial island, then you get access to the whole main world. That's when your opportunities really start to explode in terms of when you can see language here and there. And you can take it completely at your own pace, so you can choose whether you want to, explore a dungeon and do things, or whether you want to actually just talk with the villagers and get to know people, whether you want to go around and just explore places and talk to every NPC you come across. There is much more opportunities. This game has so many more NPCs scattered around the world that it really does make it feel a lot more lived in. I was walking around going to just some random spot, I saw an interesting little temple, I was like, wow, that's interesting. Normally, it would just be bare, there's no one around. But there was not only someone near the temple doing, studies on it, but there was also someone guarding the fence nearby, and someone walking up and down the road, and a traveling goodsman trying to sell their goods or something, right? So there's lots more interactions, which is really good, and it gets it a little bit closer to like a Pokemon experience where, as you're playing the game, you can talk to NPCs and kind of get to know the lore behind, the area and the events, the things that are happening, and kind of give some dialogue to actually what you're doing rather than just doing it, right? Which I feel Breath of the Wild gets a little bit more on that aspect, whereas this game, Tears of the Kingdom, has a lot more NPCs, so that's very nice. So in terms of the voice acting scenes, they're all limited to these cutscenes that, as I said previously, you can't take at your own pace. The only way you can do it is take screenshots. So that means it's not really a voice-acted game for a language learner, right? You can't take it at your own pace, you can't replay the audio, you can't do anything like that. I'm not sure if this game will eventually unlock the ability to replay cutscenes. I haven't been able to see that in the first couple of 5 hours or something. However, Breath of the Wild did have an ability that you can actually replay some of the cutscenes, so perhaps this game will as well, but as you're playing, you don't have that opportunity. So I really feel like this game is an incredible game. I definitely don't want it to sound too negative about this game. This game is an incredible experience. Even I was like, as I was playing, I'm just wanting to, get to the language. I'm just wanting to, get footage and stuff like that. But even I was like, oh, wow, I can do this. Oh my God. Oh, and I got completely absorbed without realizing. I was like, oh no, what am I doing? I got to go back to focusing on the language. The gameplay is very, very fun if you like Zelda. I think if you're a fan of Zelda and you wanted to pick between this or Breath of the Wild, for example, to learn Japanese with, this game is better than Breath of the Wild for learning Japanese with. This game has a few more characters that speak in more normal Japanese, and you get more interactions because there is just so much more of a variety of characters. So I think just in terms of difficulty, it is a little bit better than Breath of the Wild. So let's have a quick look at the actual language that's used in this game. What I've done is I've gone through a bunch of random moments in the game, kind of every 10 minutes. And I've taken 20 different sentences over a period of several hours. Every kind of 10 minutes, I've taken a screenshot. And so I'm just going to go through a couple of those lines right now, just to kind of give you a feel of what the language is like as you're playing the game. So first up, a conversation between Link and Zelda, and this is really easy language right here. A majority of this is at a lower level, and actually most of this is around the N5 to N3 level. And in terms of frequency, most of this is in the top 500. The rarest piece of language here being Chica, an N3 piece of language for underground, but most of the other stuff is very easy. So I've gone through all of the language with the kind of usefulness and the top frequency of this language according to Lorenzi's Jisho, a website that's very useful to kind of check out information about language, very good dictionary. Here, having a look at how frequent this language is, and the average score right now is the top 750 words, so this is a very easy sentence. Next, we have a little bit more difficult language here. Again, most of the language here in this cutscene is a kind of N5 to N3 level. Here, the average score is 850, so still very similar. A little bit further in the story now, we have this sentence with a bit more rarer language. The average score of this level now ramps up to 3,600, so the top 3,600 useful words, for example. So we have two pieces of very rare language. The first here, Kiden. This is a kind of archaic way of saying anata, you, top 11,000, so very rare. And then we also have here Kuchi, te wa kuchi. Te just means your hand, but kuchi, this is short for kuchiru, to rot, to decay. This is an N1 piece of language in the top 15,000. So we're starting to see a little bit more rarer language that's very archaic and not used normally. Now outside, we're having a look at these robot creatures that I mentioned, and they speak in relatively easy language. The score here for this sentence is 1,000, so we have a lot of top 500 piece of language, if you've noticed a lot of this does. So not too difficult. Some piece of language at the higher levels in the JLPT, like N1, N2, but in terms of the frequency, like the usefulness of the actual language, most of it's pretty decent. But we can definitely see that it does get a little bit more difficult. Here we have a sentence in the 3,800 ranking, so again, back to the 3,000. This is particularly because we have two words that are beyond the top 10,000 most useful words. So let's have a look. Buki, pretty simple for a weapon. Tekitoni just means kind of half-mindedly, relatively common, top 3,000 words. We have furimawasu, this means to kind of wave about, top 5,000, so a little bit rarer. We have the zu form, so without doing, N3 piece of grammar. Aite ni aite, very common word for your opponent. Chumoku, that's to kind of observe. So without swinging your weapon all over the place, observe your opponent. Shikkari, very common piece of language to do something properly. And then we have some rare piece of language here. So, mai o toru no ga kanyo desu. So, mai is a top 15,000 piece of language to mean a kind of interval. This is referring to like a break or a space, right? The timing, the space where you can attack, right? Mai o toru, so to take that break. No ga, so the thing of that is kanyo desu, and kanyo just means essential, very important. But it is a bit more rarer. Both these pieces of language are not in the JLPT, and this is the top 10,000 useful words. But now looking at the item descriptions for some of these random items, for example, here is an item that's kind of like an energy source in Zelda, and this has a pretty high difficulty. This has a score of 7,300, and remember, the higher the number means the more difficult it is. You would need to know on average the top 7,300 words in order to be able to understand this comfortably. That's just for the average, not for everything. So some of this language is kind of game specific. If we have a look, we have Zonao. This is a name of some sort of tribe of people in this game, so this is a Zelda specific piece of language. Energy, energy, no kessho. And this is just an N1 piece of language to mean a kind of crystal. Pretty common though, top 5,000, but it means a crystal. So an energy crystal of Zonao. However, in the item description, there's some very rare pieces of language, and it doesn't have furigana, making it quite difficult. So, zonanium kara, from this thing called zonanium, seiren sareta. So seiren is a very rare piece of language, not in the JLPT, top 14,000 for refined, as in often seen with ore and things like that, like a refined ore. So here, seiren sareta energy, so a refined energy o. And then another rare piece of language here in the top 20,000, gyoshuku. This means condensed. So, gyoshuku shite tsukurareta kessho. A crystal that is made from condensed, refined energy. So, right, the language is relatively difficult, especially without any furigana. So this is definitely the most difficult sentence we've come across so far with a score of 7,300. Again, these item descriptions are quite difficult. This one has a score of 4,300, so it is a little bit more difficult. Whew, these item descriptions are tough though. I really wish they had furigana. This one here has a score of 8,600. So again, we're getting, the average piece of language here is in the top 8,000 words. Here we have 5 words that are beyond the top 10k. Again, with these cutscenes, this is a very difficult piece of language. 11,000 is the score for this sentence right here. So quite rare stuff here. Some of this language though is very crucial for this game in particular. Like hokora here means a wayward shrine. This is a very useful word for this Zelda game in particular. Top 15,000. Erareta, something that you received. Shukufuku, the blessing. No hikari no chikara de, with the power of the light. And then we have some rare piece of language here. So shoki o Jōka suru koto ga dekiru you da. So shoki is a very useful piece of language for this game in particular, and this is the word for like a miasma, some sort of sickness or disease. As kind of there's this weird red stuff that's glowing around, no story spoilers, but that here is referred to as shoki, the miasma. And then we have Jōka suru. This means to purify something. Another rare piece of language here, top 10,000. So to purify the miasma. That's a pretty tough piece of language, and that's definitely why this sentence here has 11,000 as its score. But now we're back to more normal speech here on the open world. We're talking to a random NPC, and this has a score of 6,000. So if you know the average 6,000 most useful words, you probably understand this. And again, this other NPC has relatively difficult piece of language here with a score of 9,500. Sometimes you'll come across characters like this where they kind of have the old man type speech, but the actual language that he uses isn't that difficult here with a score of 2,600. So not too difficult, right? It's just once you get used to the ja, right, the old man speech, you'll probably be able to be fine with characters like this. Again, another NPC here with a score of 4,800, and this isn't too difficult, but the first part has a bit of language that isn't very common, and then it's a little bit challenging, right? So fuka ana just means a deep hole. Tsutara is toitara, if I'm talking about. And then we have this pretty rare piece of language here in the top 25,000. We have tempenchi. This is the word for like a natural disaster, like a cataclysm, right? That type of thing, right? It's very similar to cataclysm where, maybe not the average person knows what that means in English. Maybe, I don't know, but the same kind of thing here, right? Oh yeah, the map descriptions here are pretty difficult. This bit right here has a score of 8,800, right? So a lot of this is quite difficult, and some of this doesn't even have rankings at all. And because it doesn't have furigana, it makes it quite difficult to look at. However, you can just use Google Lens and go through it quite quickly. But when characters talk, it then gets a little bit easier again. Thankfully, it has furigana as well. But this sentence here has a ranking of 2,600, and most of this language is pretty important and pretty useful. The rarest piece of language is just Hokuto for the northeast, but still very important piece of language. And finally, we have the item description for a parasail, and this has a score of just under 6,000. Most of the language isn't difficult, but there again is some really difficult language scattered here and there. Like for example, this word right here in the top 35,000. Kaku, gliding through the air. Incredibly rare, this piece of language. I don't think I've ever seen this before personally, so very rare. And so what I've done is with about 20 different sections of language, 20 different sentences, but also including item descriptions, so a hefty bit of language, right? And this is over the first kind of 3 or 4 hours of gameplay. And the average score for all of this language is 6,000. So that means that if you know the top 6,000 most useful words, that's not related to the JLPT, just the 6,000 most useful words, then you will actually be able to play this game relatively comfortable. There will be a couple of pieces of language here and there that you don't know, but for the majority, the average level is about 6,000. If we have a look at the breakdown of these 20 pieces of language, we can see, however, that 40% of the language here is not included in the JLPT. 23% is in the N5, 10% is in the N4, 12% in the N3, 5% in the N2, 8% in the N1. So it's very close to half of the language that's in these sentences do not exist in the JLPT. So isn't that interesting, right? There's a lot of really common language, but it's not language that you'll see in the JLPT. And that's what will make this game a little bit more difficult for you to learn. If you've already had experience playing games, especially fantasy games, you probably won't find this as difficult. There will be language you will never have seen before. It's happened to me myself. I've seen, even playing this, I've already probably come across, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 new pieces of language that I've never seen before. And, I do come across pieces of language I've never seen before sometimes, like I'm playing Final Fantasy XIV, and that's quite difficult. I come across words I don't know, but generally, like the average game, I know most of the language, so this does have a little bit more rarer language here and there. So if you were only focusing on the JLPT and you only were at like an N4 level, you would maybe be able to read about 30% of the language. If you were at an N3 level, you might be able to read about half of the language. The N1 and the N2 isn't really going to help you too much. What's going to help you more is learning the very frequent and important pieces of language that unfortunately just aren't included in the JLPT. So Tears of the Kingdom gets a language score of 6,000. Now just know this is only 20 sentences that I've taken from a couple of hours of footage, and it's about every 10 minutes or so I took an example sentence, so it's not going to be 100% accurate to what your experience is going to be, but it is just a nice kind of slice test of what kind of language you're going to come across. However, where does that put this game on a Japanese learning tier list scale? So if we have a look at this tier list, then I'm going to be working on adding all of these games to the tier list gradually. As we go through each game, they'll be added to this list, and the spreadsheet will be in the description, so you can have a look at any time what games or what rank, and if I do update things, I'll keep them updated here. Not only that, but I'll also have a breakdown of all of the features that are available in all of these games, so that you can figure out exactly if this is a game that's going to be useful for you, your level, and what things you'd like to have in a game when you play it in Japanese. So first, having a look at the list, we have Yokai Watch here as an S tier, and it's ranked for very easy, right? So at the very, very right here would be difficult, and the very, very left would be easy. Now, technically, Yokai Watch could actually be an A-ranked game. Here are my kind of breakdown of what that means. S means it's highly recommended and it has all of the tools you need to make enjoying learning Japanese very easy. A means it has most of the tools that you need. Difficulty is not a part of the actual ranking, difficulty is a part of this separate ranking. So the vertical ranking is all about the accessibility, and the horizontal ranking is about how difficult that game is. Now right now I have Yokai Watch as an S tier, but it could also be an A tier, and actually perhaps A tier is a little bit better fitting just because it doesn't have things like voice acting and chat logs and replayable audio and stuff like that, which some other games do, which do put it at a tier above Yokai Watch. Yokai Watch is incredibly good because it really has that baseline language that makes it so useful for you to play absolutely any game, starting off with this game. So for that reason I have it at S tier, but it could be A tier, really it's on the line here. I think for beginners this game is an S tier, whereas generally compared to every game in existence and every learner at every level, I would put at an A tier. So how about The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom? Well, if you have a look here, I have a summary of everything that this game has. It does have push to continue, and it has furigana. Those two things make it an incredibly good game for learning Japanese with. Any game that allows you to take it at your own pace with furigana is very, very good. There is a downside though. Tears of the Kingdom doesn't have push to continue cutscenes, and you cannot pause those cutscenes, so the cutscenes are almost useless for a Japanese learner. It's nice for a little bit of immersion, but you can't really learn with them. There's no replayable audio or anything like that, and as you can see here, it does have a higher overall language score comparing to Yokai Watch. The average usefulness ranking for the words in Yokai Watch is the average 3,000 words, whereas Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is double that with 6,000. There is a bit more archaic and Keigo speech, however a lot of the language that you come across in Tears of the Kingdom is totally normal and useful for all kinds of different games you want to play. I do find the font a little bit less readable than Yokai Watch. It's just a little bit less readable. Maybe for you, you don't see any difference, but I feel just a little bit. It's a little bit more difficult to read. The gameplay balance is very high in gameplay, which might be great for you because then you can choose when you want to study and when you just want to play games. But I do feel like it's very high on the gameplay. Sure, there's the towns and the NPCs, and that's wonderful, really good. But most of your time playing this game won't actually be with dialogue. Most of the time will be with the actual gameplay itself. And you can switch from English to Japanese, which is quite nice. So back on the tier list, I would probably say that it's not necessarily a recommended game for learning Japanese with, but the fact that it has furigana and push to continue have to make it a relatively high ranking, just because that makes it so accessible for learners to learn Japanese with. So I feel like that Tears of the Kingdom is very much somewhere in either the B or the C tier. Difficulty? Well, remember, this is the actual level of the language, and you can definitely say that Tears of the Kingdom is much harder than Yokai Watch is. It is still accessible with having furigana, but it's definitely more on the difficult end of things. but because it has furigana, perhaps it's not quite as difficult as some other games. So the difference between a B and a B means it's a great game for playing in Japanese just with a few tools missing. C means it's decent, but it might be challenging. Well, this game is a tough one because it is challenging when you're reading the item descriptions, but then it's very accessible when you're talking with villagers. It's very challenging when you're looking at cutscenes, but then it's accessible with most of the other dialogue. So this is tough. I really do feel like this game is somewhere between a B and a C tier. It's very, very difficult to actually say exactly which one it is. But I think just because most of the game is pushed to continue and it has furigana, it should be probably more towards the B tier than the C tier. But it's definitely more on the more difficult side of things. So I would give Zelda Tears of the Kingdom a B tier. It's definitely a bit more challenging in the difficulty, but thanks to the fact that it has furigana and that most of it is pushed to continue, makes it a much more accessible game. So what do you guys think? You're going to check this game out for yourself for learning Japanese with, or perhaps just sink hundreds of hours exploring this incredible world and having lots of fun with all of the creative ways you can combine things and create things? I've seen people do some absolutely insane stuff. Without spoiling anything, you know, there's some pretty crazy stuff they build, things beyond your imagination that you've never been able to do in a video game before, so I think they've really taken crafting and this kind of self-expression to the next level. Anyway, thanks so much guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you enjoy Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. A huge thanks to all the supporters on Patreon and the Game Gengo website. It's all thanks to you that I can make these videos for you guys, so thank you so much guys for all of your support. And if you like these videos and want to support the channel, then feel free to come join us on the Game Gengo Discord community through either the website or through Patreon. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all again next time.